Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us now for this Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm David Percy. Up first here again, 3 days in a row now, no advisories, watches, or warnings out anywhere in the state, Bering Sea, Aleutians, or southern Alaska in the interior there, either for the Panhandle or up to the north. All watch, warning, advisory free for the next day or so, with the main storm track a little bit farther to the south now. And from there, we'll go right to satellite imagery and dry day with some sun over the southeast coast. Got some mid and high level clouds increasing there along the eastern North Gulf Coast, Yakutat, and onto along the coast of the Panhandle. And then a system coming across the Bering Sea, spreading some moisture into Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. Kind of a break there over the central Aleutians, and another weak system there pushing some rain into the western Aleutians. Otherwise, just some clouds up over the northern Bering Sea with a couple of weak troughs there that are kind of kicking off to the northeast, bringing a band of moisture across the northwest coast in toward Kotzebue, another one into the Bering Strait from St. Lawrence Island, and yet another one there just west of St. Matthew Island. That'll all be progressing eastward, as well as the system in Bristol Bay, spreading some rain across Kodiak Island this afternoon, and mid and high level clouds as far north as about Kenai at picture time here at 3 p.m. Saturday. And moisture lifting northeastward there from the interior. Still some lingering light snow and low clouds in the Fairbanks area, but basically snow shower activity and areas of light snow really diminishing from what they were earlier, with a little bit of low mid clouds up along the north slope. On the chart today, there's a low center south of Kodiak Island, or it's actually southeast of Kodiak Island there, with the rain just catching Kodiak State Airport. They've picked up about 1/10 of an inch so far. Rain changing to showers over the Alaska Peninsula with gusty northwest winds, but all about under 30 miles an hour there. Basically weak high pressure made for dry conditions, a little bit of clearing over the central Aleutians, possibly the eastern Aleutians as well. And then that next weak system out to the west there, bringing some rain and a little bit of an increase in the winds for the western Aleutians. And then a weak low pressure there over the northern northwest Bering Sea, another weak trough bringing the scattered shower activity to the St. Lawrence Island area, kind of lifting north of the area there into the Bering Strait, western Seward Peninsula. Then some areas of light snow or snow showers on the central and southern slopes of the western Alaska Range out to the northwest coast, Noaa Valley areas, and snow showers mostly ending. Still some areas of light snow under that area high pressure over the Tanana Valley. Otherwise, mostly clear skies south and east of the Alaska Range. Again, mid and high level clouds pushing up into the Kenai Peninsula and North Gulf Coast in toward the Panhandle this afternoon, but basically a dry day with sunshine in many areas there. And for tonight, that system deepens as it tracks eastward across the Gulf of Alaska. There are storm warnings out for the southwest Gulf of Alaska for tonight for 50-knot winds, and gale warnings for the coast of the Panhandle. Entire coast of the Panhandle winds will be coming up to gale force 35 to 40 knots there, with increasing rain, especially along the central and southern areas. Prince of Wales Island probably see the heaviest amounts of rain, and then that'll spread in toward Ketchikan later, but it's going to have trouble reaching the eastern border areas tonight. High pressure keeps it dry with light winds, mostly clear, especially south and east of the Alaska Range there. Kodiak Island stays clear with gusty northwest winds, holding the temperatures up there a little from what they'd otherwise be if they were light. There'll be another cold night over south central Alaska, and variable clouds over the interior to mostly cloudy skies with low clouds, maybe some areas of fog under that area of high pressure near the Yukon River. That'll extend up to the eastern Arctic coast. And then again, those troughs keeping a chance of light snow up over the Seward Peninsula to the Noaa Valley. And then that weak system will spread rain, light rain and fog IFR flying conditions into the Pribilof Islands, with the front trailing back into the western Aleutians, into another system that appears on the chart that's even weaker than the 1,005 millibar low approaching the southwest coast tomorrow. That'll keep it cloudy and wet with breezy conditions for the western Aleutians, and along the frontal boundary, actually the entire Aleutian chain will see areas of light rain, fog, maybe drizzle, and probably IFR flying conditions right up to the Alaska Peninsula. Then I'll push into Bristol Bay tomorrow and along the southwest coast with areas of snow over the inland areas, mixed rain and snow changing to mostly rain out toward the coastline, and of course the eastern Bering Sea and Pribilofs. Another mostly sunny day, south central Alaska, Kodiak Island, with some gusty north winds, small craft advisories for Prince William Sound tomorrow, and the North Gulf Coast as well. And gale warnings for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, with those northwest winds, the higher pressure building up from Bristol Bay, moving to the Alaska Range in the afternoon. Rain, moderate to heavy at times over the southern panhandle, lighter to the north. And then for the day Monday, just some scattered snow showers, northern Kuskokwim Valley back to the western Arctic coast, otherwise dry and cool over much of mainland Alaska, and drier for the panhandle with some rain approaching the south coast late in the day. Big warm front spreading rain into the Pribilofs and the Alaska Peninsula with gusty winds and rain for the western and central Aleutians. Lows for tonight, 30s and 40s for the panhandle, teens for the Copper River Basin, 20s elsewhere except lower to mid-30s, Kachemak Bay and Kodiak Island, followed by highs, upper 20s for the Copper River Basin, upper 30s to lower 40s, south central Alaska, mid-40s Kodiak Island, and 45 to 50 for the southeast coast. Lows in Bristol Bay Monday morning, lower to mid-30s, lower 20s to the Kuskokwim Valley, Susitna Valley, and really south central Alaska as well. Single numbers for the Copper River Basin. Upper 30s to lower 40s for the Panhandle. Upper 30s Kodiak Island, followed by highs in the mid-teens for the Copper River Basin. Otherwise 30s and 40s elsewhere. Up to the north, lows teens and 20s tonight, followed by highs in the upper teens to lower 30s, warmest out toward the Bering Strait. Nome looking at 40, followed by a low of 30. Single numbers to the northeast, highs teens and 20s to lower 30s out toward the Seward Peninsula. Lows in the 40s for the Alaska Peninsula tonight.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On Sunday morning's flying weather graphic showing marginal VFR over much of the northern interior from the northern Kuskokwim Valley all the way up to the Arctic coast, except for the lee side of the Brooks Range. IFR from the southern slopes of the eastern Brooks Range down across the Yukon Flats into the mountains there, just south of Eagle, and along the Yukon River. VFR south of the Alaska Range, across southern interior Alaska to Kodiak Island. IFR pushing into the panhandle along the coast, with marginal VFR pushing into the inside waters. Band of IFR out over the central Bering Sea, western Aleutians approaching Adak, and we'll see for the afternoon that area kind of splits, slides into Atka Island, and another portion moves east-northeast there just north of Unalaska Island and Nunavak Island, grazing the northern Alaska Peninsula, western portions anyway, and then extending northward to the Seward Peninsula. Another batch up there along the northwest coast in the Noatak Valley to the DeLong Mountains, and the southern half of the Panhandle or so IFR, northern half marginal becoming VFR, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, VFR for the North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, and all of south central Alaska, Prince William Sound, up into the Copper River Basin. Marginal VFR for the mid and upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country from the Wrangell Mountains actually northward all the way to the Arctic coast. And for the Monday morning forecast, IFR from about False Pass westward to the Komodorskis, covering the southwest Bering Sea. Marginal VFR for the Pribilofs, Alaska Peninsula. IFR pushing into western Kodiak Island and the Aleutian Range, Tiliamna Lake, northeast Bristol Bay, northwestward there to Norton Sound and the Seward Peninsula through the Bering Strait, and along the northwest coast to Cape Lisburne. Marginal VFR for the Arctic coast. Good VFR, eastern Brooks Range southward, central eastern interior, all the way to the North Gulf Coast and the northern Panhandle. Marginal VFR, southern Panhandle. And then for the afternoon, mostly VFR, the southern half of interior Alaska, mostly marginal VFR for the northern half. Best conditions off to the east, and northern Bering Sea, marginal VFR, same thing for the northwest coast, Seward Peninsula area. IFR for the Alaska Peninsula, and all of the Aleutians, southern Bering Sea, as well as the Pribilof Islands, marginal VFR Kodiak Island, and the Panhandle. Passes, Anatuvik, marginal VFR at times throughout the day tomorrow, especially in the morning hours. That same forecast pretty much goes for Adigan Pass as well. Morning hours could be marginal, mostly VFR into the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR, either approach, and same forecast for any good VFR for the western Alaska range through the passes. Windy, VFR, north and south entrances. Could be some marginal VFR lingering on the north side of Isabel Pass, maybe even into the pass. Down to the south, it'll be VFR. Same thing for Mentasta, same pattern. Marginal VFR possible from the pass out the north entrance. Better conditions through the southern entrance. Tanita, VFR in either approach. And for Portage, VFR west and east as well. Chilkoot and White, VFR, and then with that system moisture coming north and northeast, look for conditions, ceilings visibilities lowering into the marginal VFR category during the latter part of the afternoon or so. And freezing levels, 2,000 feet, kind of nudged northward there just west of Nunivak Island, and 4,000 to 6,000 feet over the west central Aleutians, 2,000 feet right up the east side of Kodiak Island and cutting across the northern Panhandle. Icing, several areas here. The heaviest probably will be some considerable moderate moving into the central and southern southeast coast. And then with that next system, some light to isolated moderate coming into the southwest coast. Alaska Peninsula, and then trailing along the frontal boundary across all of the Aleutians out to a weaker system there near Shimia. And for the jet stream, west-northwesterlies, 105 knots, western Aleutians, southern Bering Sea. Main jet, though, south of the Panhandle, 145 knots across the Queen Charlotte's. And that low center at 9,000 feet cutting into the central southeast coast, and that keeps the strongest winds to the south at this elevation. Northerlies, though, at 40 knots across Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula, down into the western North Gulf Coast, and 3,000 feet, 50 knots there, southeast Bering Sea, 65 to 70 over the western Aleutians, 40 knots for the North Gulf Coast areas, 40 knot westerlies for Norton Sound. And with that, the Seward Peninsula, considerable moderate chop. Same thing, considerable moderate chop for the Alaska Peninsula Aleutians, Kodiak Island, and the North Gulf Coast.
We can't just put the fires out because we can't put them out. We've tried that now for a century, and it doesn't work. It just makes the next one worse.
You may see a place like this and think, total devastation. And it's not your fault for thinking that.
But that depiction is, as we've learned from countless experts over the last 2 weeks, not the whole story, and not how you should think about wildfires.
The truth is, there are lots of types of habitats out west, and fire affects them all in unique ways. So it's important to start thinking about the big picture with wildland fires. So let's first rewind. To help us understand what's going on out west, Rob and I started calling up the experts, and what we found was that the story of fire, particularly in the west, is complex. So to understand it, we planned a road trip. Road trip time!
The goal of our road trip was to see as many forests as we could and meet experts around the region to help us understand the role fire plays out here. First destination was to find the forest burned by the now famous Great Fires of 1910. And at the heart of what is known as the Big Blow-Up, the logical first place to stop, the city of Wallace.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Good. Haley and I are in this cute town of Wallace, Idaho, which was completely destroyed by the 1910 fires. You can see how much damage this fire actually did. Let's send up the drone and see what the surroundings look like now.
What we found was a small town surrounded by a dense forest, with every single tree just over 100 years old.
So everything we see behind us now, that's all new growth since 1910.
And to help us put these historic fires and the forests around Wallace in perspective, we met up with historian Diane Smith.
This is Wallace, and here are your fires.
All of this is the 1910 fires.
This is not that unusual. The fact is, it just was at a time in our development as a country. We noticed it, we paid attention to it, and we got the national attention for it.
Right.
As it turns out, these fires helped reinforce the idea at the time that every fire needed to be suppressed at all costs. And this suppression for so long has led to new problems, namely thick forests full of fuel. But don't just take my word for it. Let me show you the difference.
Notice how different this place is than this one that has been thinned out quite heavily in the past, or like an area like this that's been burnt quite frequently.
In fact, both of these areas show how many forests would have looked in the past under regular burns. The dead and low-growing material gets consumed easily by fire, very much unlike this forest, which has had fire suppression for over 100 years and could lead to a high-intensity fire.
And all of this dry, dead material, that's problematic.
So we went looking for a big fire and just followed the smoke.
Oh gosh, a huge crown fire. I gotta get this.
These high-intensity fires aren't great because in many forests they kill all the trees over a large area, even in forests that used to be very resistant to frequent fires. And nobody knows that better than the people that work in this particular forest.
There's green coming back, and I guess I've gotten somewhat used to it, and I still have hope that the entire Sierra Nevadas won't look like this, that we can maybe get ahead of it. So the fires nowadays can move from the surface right into the tree canopies really easily, where in the past, fires would have kept trees pruned, they would have kept fuel densities low, and so now you end up with a lot more high severity fires in the West than had a fire regime kept under its historic recurrence. This to me is more a lesson of fire exclusion and keeping fire out of the system. If we're keeping it out of when it would burn with a beneficial effect, it will burn, and the probability of it burning at an unbeneficial state is higher.
So again, this is where it's complicated. We thought if only we could stop the fires, we'd win the fight. But the fires like the King Fire here show that stopping the fires only made it worse. Add that to the fact that we're living closer than ever to these wild lands. So to help us understand the wildland-urban interface, we met up with CAL FIRE. And as we were pulling up to this neighborhood, one of the residents quickly came out to tell us about the latest fire.
Yeah, our biggest fear is fire. It was very scary. I mean, everybody was honking and get out, and you know, there's a fire.
This is the risk across California. The response piece alone isn't going to solve this challenge if the homeowners aren't organized.
Because we're all in the same boat. We're one match away from everybody losing everything. It's a real fear.
Literally, we could have that fire spread up in here within a matter of seconds.
Wow.
California is going to have fires. We're not going to stop all the fires in California, so we have to have an infrastructure that's fire resistant. We need to work on policies that help us engage in active management of our forest. That's using prescribed fire as a tool. It's all the things in the toolbox. It's a combination of managing our forest and a combination of protecting our communities that are in them.
If it wasn't complicated enough, this made it very clear that you can't just let the fires burn whenever they start. The forests need to be managed to help mitigate the risk to us. But using fire seems to be one of the keys to making things safer, and knowing the science behind fire is always key to implementing good management.
Fire Sciences Lab, right over here.
So we made a stop at the Missoula Fire Lab to try to understand what we know about fire.
You see the flames at the very top and how they're sticking to the slope?
They really are. Everybody's laying down.
They're laying down. Well, that's flame attachment. Actually a very difficult thing to understand.
Here at the Fire Lab, the scientists study the basics of fire. Understanding the complexities here helps firefighters and forest managers in the field better predict and fight wildland fires.
Fires are inevitable. The only choices that we really have is what kind of fire to have and when do we want it. And that's it. Almost? Ready. You're ready. Jason's ready.
Mark's team is prepping to light a huge bed of precisely cut cardboard.
You're not going to be in any danger. So when the lights go out, don't move. Gasoline.
This is one of many experiments they'll run to understand the physics of fire, how it moves, how it spreads, and all of this measured by precise scientific instruments and high-speed cameras. Tens of thousands of pieces of cardboard up in flames in mere seconds. The ongoing research will help us better understand fire with the ultimate goal that we can live better with it. But can we do that? There is one forest we knew of that seems to have figured out this coexistence with fire, a place where fires burn all summer, every summer. It's part of their way of life and a mentality we wanted to know about. And here we went out with our guides Frank Lake and Steve Valentine, who work with the local U.S. Forest Service and tribe to help keep a healthy forest.
This is perfect. The fires basically come through and cleared out the understory, and all that's left are the trees.
Yeah, it's black and it's charred, and you just see a few of the earliest sprouts, but you come back in here a year, it's going to be alive again.
And to many, this may seem destroyed, but they view it differently here.
That fire's medicine, because it's not if it comes, it's when it comes. We need fire, and fire needs us.
You see, fire needs people to remind us how important fire is to the ecosystem. Frank and Steve's ancestors have been burning this forest for millennia. It's now part of what makes the forest special. They just want to make sure that it's not forgotten.
Basically, what you leave behind is what's important.
When they say this is your foods and your medicines, your sacred places, your springs, your water, that's essential, that's who we are as people. We have to learn to live with fire. We have to learn to respect fire. We have to maintain that security. That's why I do what I do.
Haley and I have learned a lot on our journey. We've learned that fire is complicated, and it's not as black and white as we make it out to be, and it is an integral part of our forests. They've had fire running through them for thousands of years, and they will continue to have fire in them in the future. And we can't always put the fires out. We have to decide what kind of fires to live with, and that is why we need to work with these fire crews from around the country. We also need a public who understands the importance of fire on the landscape. A healthy forest, you see, is a forest that lives with fire.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And looking at the marine forecast, we got gale warnings for the coastline of the Panhandle. South to southwest winds 40 knots on the south coast, seas 24 feet, and northeast winds 40 to 45 knots on the north coast. Lincoln Canal Glacier Bay, north winds 25 knots, gale warnings for Stevens Passage for east winds at 35 knots, southeast winds 40 knots for Clarence Strait with 14-foot seas. And for the day Monday, lighter winds out of the west along the central and south coast at 30 knots, with those seas still up there on the south coast as high as 26 feet. North coast, west winds 20 to 30 knots. And for the northern interchannels, north winds at 15 knots, Stevens Passage southeast at 15 knots. And for Clarence Strait, winds down to 15 knots and seas subsiding to 6 feet. Prince William Sound for Sunday, small craft advisories. Northwest winds 25 knots with 5-foot seas. And for the North Gulf Coast, northwest winds 30 knots, seas around 10 feet. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay, winds out of the northwest at 35 knots. And for Cook Inlet, north winds 10 to 15 knots with 2-foot seas. And for Monday, Cook Inlet, northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, seas 2 to 4 feet. Gale warnings for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands for northwest winds continue at 35 knots, seas around 10 feet. Prince William Sound, north winds at 10 knots. North Gulf Coast, north to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots. Kodiak Island for Sunday, small craft advisories. West to northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula, west-southwest winds at 30 knots. And for Bristol Bay, winds will be southwest at 25. And then for Monday, gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula, west-southwest winds 35 to 40 knots. Kodiak Island, west winds 30 to 35 knots, seas as high as 12 feet. Bristol Bay, west winds 30 knots, seas 11 feet. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, gale warnings, southwest winds 35 knots. Gale warnings also for the Central Aleutians, southwest winds 35 knots. Gale warnings for the Western Aleutians, southwest winds 35 knots, seas 15 feet. Even stronger winds in store for Monday. Western Aleutians, southwest 45 knots, seas around 20 feet. Central Aleutians, southwest at 45 knots. And for the Eastern Aleutians, west-southwest winds 45 to 50 knots, with seas running 15 to 21 feet. And for the Pribilof Islands, for Sunday, southwest winds 35 knots, strong enough for gale warnings there, seas up to 13 feet. And for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, southwest winds at 20 knots, 7 to 8 foot seas. Kuskokwim Delta coast, southwest winds 30 knots with 9 foot seas. St. Matthew Island, winds will be northwest at 30 knots. For Monday, good gales for the Pribilof, south 45 knots, seas building to 21 feet. Gale warnings for the southwest coast, south to southwest winds 35 knots. Gale warnings also for St. Matthew Island, southeast winds at 35 knots. Lighter winds for St. Lawrence Island out of the west at 15 knots. Up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, small craft advisories for east winds at 25 knots. For the central and western Arctic coast, all the way down to Cape Thompson, winds will be southeast at 25 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas. Cape Thompson to Wales, south winds 25 knots. And for the first day for Monday, for the area from Wales to Cape Thompson, west winds 20 knots. Western Arctic coast, southeast winds 20 knots. Small craft advisories for the central coast, southeast winds at 25 knots. And the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, winds will be east at 25 knots. For tonight, rain starts to push into the panhandle, especially along the coast, taking a little longer to get to the eastern border there. Otherwise, dry south central Alaska and chilly on the temperatures, a little breezy, but dry for Kodiak Island. Next system spreads rain into the Pribilofs with the trailing front extending back to the western Aleutians. A couple of troughs along the west coast keep rain and snow showers going there. Otherwise dry over the interior. And for the day Sunday, low pressure moves to the central south coast of the Panhandle for the heaviest precipitation down over the southern areas, but there'll still be some moisture up to the north. Next system approaches the southwest coast with increasing rain and wind there into the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay. And another system out over the western Aleutians moves northeastward on Monday with warm front rains to the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise dry and cool over interior Alaska, drier for the Panhandle.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.